It's 6:30 in the morning. It's a beautiful morning. I never intended to see it, but I've been up. I haven't slept the whole night, and there was this article that was posted by Suraj on the TPG. Variance is a labyrinth. It got me thinking, and I thought maybe, I've been doing like written word. I thought it'll be perfect to just do an impromptu of what has been my experience with variance. I think the core insight which he pointed out in that article is really relevant. Like, I think he nailed it. And my overall experience with variance, the thing that I realized is variance holds some kind of weird power on our psyche. Like, I used to think, like, let's say you win a tournament, right? And then the first guy gets all this glory, recognition, while the guy who finishes second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th, like whatever number, probably they were as good, probably they were as capable, probably they had put in a good amount of effort, but they have this weird obsession with just number one, which is kind of arbitrarily decided by variance. It's kind of well summarized by Adi in his Deputy Colossus winner interview. He said, like, winning this tournament doesn't make me any better than the other players in the field, nor losing it would have made me any inferior. I think those are like true words coming from a real veteran, like someone who has gone through the journey, seen the whole gig, and knows how it works. I haven't had the same perspective when I started off. I think that's what kind of made it really interesting for me and made it a real personal revelation of sorts. I think there's this saying, like, money / success doesn't really change people, but it just exposes them. And Nick Howard, my coach, in one of the interviews or whatever YouTube videos, he said something like this, that whenever he sees someone win a huge tournament or like exorbitant amount of money based on variance, it's like life has given him a full dosage of reality check. And I'm essentially the living proof for it, so to speak. To tell you a little bit about my journey with understanding and taking hold of variance, or getting a grasp of it. If I look back like a year and a half ago, when I had my first big tournament win and subsequent few wins during a short amount of period, I had put too much, I'd given myself too much credit, When I look back, I know exactly where my game stands, and it's not that it was super bad, but it wasn't as good as I thought it was. And essentially, it's not just with me, or it's not just with poker, but it's essentially the dilemma that every one of us face through various things, whatever we might do in our lives, right? Variance is the full leveler. It might be like just like you play a tournament. I mean, in a lot of ways, like our life is just like a fucking tournament, right? We get some, we are like randomly spawn in different spots. We have different variance equations that we get in this one particular event, which we in a way have no control over. Yet we have to make some decisions in it and take charge of it in a way, all of us like to think that we are designing our lives in the way, and in a lot of ways we are, and yet the situations that you face are often not necessarily in your hands. So what happened with me when I faced this good variance is essentially I gave myself too much credit for this variance and gave too little respect to variance, essentially. And somehow I had already had this predisposition towards a game of looking at it more of a personal journey than a journey through some external achievements. But at least that's the story which I thought I wanted to believe I was going through. And during this journey, it has showed me in a lot of spots where I'm not actually going through the story that I think I'm going through, but something else is playing it out. I'll make it more solid for you with an example. Like basically, when I had this success, I kind of found recognition in the community, and and I thought in some ways I had arrived as a player. Soon, what followed is a multiple set of events, basically variance, which had shown me the positive side of it. It has been kind enough to immediately follow it up with a negative variance and a flip of mindset, which was bound to happen when you have overextended yourself and credited yourself with more than what you actually are, which is bound to find expression in situations like this, where you see variance aiding it in a way to expose you more. So what had happened was there was this PSL selections which I really wanted to get in, and having the results that I had, I thought I had a good chance of getting in there. And when I failed to get in there, instantaneously there was an immediate reaction of a little bit anger, but that just like a moment, and then soon it kind of transformed into something which I can make some positive out of it to motivate myself to work towards it. And while I went through all these emotions, what really came up to the surface is, deep down, what I was really looking for is not really a place in PSL or some shot at money or some other fanciful thing like that. I was believing that I wanted to play with the best players in the world, which had definitely some truth to it. But fundamentally, when I looked at the pain that I went through, what I realized was I was seeking validation. I was seeking validation as a player, and this validation is what I would get when other players recognize you as a good player. And fundamentally, it comes from a compensatory standpoint. It doesn't come from a place of fulfillment, of self-fulfillment. It comes from some kind of lack within you. And it's not something that is as easy as it may sound to recognize it. It's not as easy to overcome or deeply unrooted, because often insecurities that you have are based on a lot of traumas that you have unconsciously gone through in time you have no idea about. Like maybe you have some childhood traumas, maybe you have something which you have no clue about where you got those traumas from, maybe from another tournament. you know and when this insecurity manifests itself in so many ways, like in so many smaller ways and so many bigger ways. Like this manifests as you playing a hand versus a reg in a certain way to get a level over himself, to level it up on himself, just to prove the fact that you're a good player. It can manifest in so many ways, like you desperately wanting to uh, get across a bad bluff, just hoping that, or making a hero call which has this potential of having sick plays in your arsenal, but which is probably going to work like only 20-30% of the time. And all of these things are like very emotionally driven decisions, and I had gone through all of them. And obviously when you're going through decision making through this lens, you are highly prone to making not so optimal decisions. And variance, when it helps you it with its own magic, and you get to see the impact of it much more intensely, where essentially translates as a downswing, right? And having gone through this downswing, and having recognized what I was going through and firstly, when it was all happening for me, it was all happening like, for the first time, like essentially maybe after I had gone through this experience, when I look back at it, maybe it has happened in so many subtle ways in throughout your life, in so many small things that you have did, but maybe you don't pay enough attention to those things, because often we move on to the next thing, we move on to something else, our focus is some other thing. Maybe it's not that important for us that that particular decision had to yield, so you never really took the feedback from that decision. So all of it translated in me really reaching to a spot where I had to really question myself and really look what the fuck is happening, you know. I think when they say poker is a really hard way to make an easy living, I think the word hard obviously has some aspect of it to statistics and probabilities and the edges being high or low or whatever, but it also has a lot to do with the journey that one needs to go internally to make a living out of it or make a great player. And when I had gone through this flip, firstly it was like I had no idea what the fuck is happening, but I was able to recognize, like, okay, these things, these are the motivations with which I'm working, and I'm trying to figure out how to solve these motivations, and where do these insecurities come from, why do I need that need for validation. When I was trying to figure all of this stuff, and I happened to I happened to watch some Elliot Rowe podcast and stuff like that, and then I saw this guy Nick Howard talking about exactly what is happening to me. Basically, he's talking about a model of performance flip, where essentially a player goes through this full cycle of like, if you imagine a 2x2 matrix of ownership and surrender, him going through all these four boxes, like high on ownership, high on surrender, or low on ownership and low on surrender, which is like basically you don't own any of your activities, neither are you willing to surrender to what the output of the situation is, which is essentially the output of variance. So there you struggle really hard, like you're not able to accept what the outcome is, not are you willing to take the responsibility for your own shit. So that is probably like the worst space to be in, and from there you move to the spot of excessive ownership, and where okay, or excessive surrender, where you're like, okay, fuck it, everything is on variance, I really can't do shit, and you are not really willing to take any responsibility for your own activities. And from there, like once you recognize what you're doing, you can immediately flip back to the other side, where you take excessive ownership on yourself and really think that you can control everything, and which results in self-sabotage. Basically people, and this shit happens to everyone, like people, someone who's going through a downswing is like, bhenchod, मैं कुछ नहीं कर सकता हूँ, I can't do shit, all of this is just happening to me, and then suddenly one day he realizes, okay, maybe actually I can do something about it. But he doesn't take this middle route, but he immediately flips to the other side, saying, eventually I can control everything. And I had gone through these loops, and then I saw this guy was talking about this is something which happens to people, and he's able to articulate it and say about this stuff. Then I figured, this is like a lot more to understand, not just in terms of the game, but about your own mind, essentially, right? And then I kind of joined him as a student in Poker Detox, where they essentially don't just skim over the. Basically, there are like, for example, let's say you make a monkey bluff, right? Or some monkey tilt, and like you just bluff off the whole fucking thing and lose half of your bankroll in a single session. There are like, obviously, you first, after that session, you still have to come back to the next session, and there's a time in between that where you need to look at what the fuck happened, right? And when you look at that stuff, you're bound to realize what has happened, albeit not so much in. You can say, okay, some shit happened, okay, that is something, is an anomaly, and like what probably has triggered, and you might take self notes that you don't want to do that. And this discipline depends from person to person. Like for someone it might be really easy to get over it. For someone it might be really difficult to come out of these loops. And sometimes we don't even really look at all of the stuff. We like what happened, and we don't need to just do this, that's it, right? But there's another way where we can really dig deeper and look at what insecurity, what trigger has caused me to flip like that, and essentially inquire more into those insecurities and understand more about yourself and take that route. And Poker Detox is essentially ethos was fundamentally on exploring using this game as an insight into yourself, and through which you obviously become a good player. But it's easier said than done, because it may be even a longer route for solving a smaller problem, and maybe not everyone needs to solve it that way. Maybe for someone it is just good enough to recognize what has happened and to move on. But if you are really interested in knowing about how you are positioned, these inquiries become really important. And that is the beauty of this game that keeps me on in this game, is that every day it gives you more information about yourself. As much as about your opponent, it gives you much more information about yourself. And essentially variance is that tool which delivers you that information by putting you through these different spots. And I really it hit me, the article that Suraj wrote, Variance is a Labyrinth, where he concluded by saying that like fuck it, don't take any input, just keep on walking, don't let it affect you, either to see that it is here, it is near, or it is far, because that's exactly what is the optimal reaction for us to do against variance. Both the high and the low, both are essentially the same thing, which are even on the high you can get too high, and stop playing, stop doing what you're supposed to do, or even in the point of low variance where it can hit you so much that it can hurt your momentum, you don't have motivation to get back on the grind to doing whatever you want to do. And essentially both things, what they end up doing is just hurting your momentum. And it is that grind, of whatever you want to do is what that will take you where you want to go in your life, right? And this is as much valid to any other aspect of life as much as to poker. And personally, for me to really go through this experience and be able to articulate and put it out there has like a multi, like, you know, I'm in like mixed feelings when I'm doing this. Firstly, when I put myself out like this, there is a certain aspect of vulnerability, that threshold of vulnerability that I need to cross to even talk about this stuff. And there is this other layer of how this might be a need for validation or need for recognition or need for attention that can be layered upon this. And then there is this angle of actually having the courage and humility and to be finally at a space where I can accept what you have been. And by accepting is when you are truly moved on, because there isn't any resistance to what it is. And in taking that courage to accept and move and make myself vulnerable and expose, it also gives space for people who are going through these journeys through their own poker careers or lives to find some, you know, find some courage and to know that this is not a journey that human experience is a universal experience. All the emotions we have are probably a limited set of emotions, and there are probably a different ways in which the mixes can happen, but fundamentally all of us are going through different types of cycles, through different types of triggers. Some might need a moment to cross over it, someone might need years to cross over it. It all depends upon the karma or the whatever memory that we have gathered over a period. And in making myself vulnerable, I would like to just give that space for someone to able to recognize and accept what is happening, and maybe if you have gone through this experience, to maybe even push it a little bit deeper and take this opportunity to make yourself a little bit more honest to yourself. And there have been many articles which I have written over the last 1 year. I have done some podcast, but I haven't put anything out because often when I write the stuff and then I just look at it the next day, I have so much to take from them for myself and then I see the vanity of it to be too much distracting for me at that point, so I never really put them out. But somehow just reading this article and just kept me thinking, and I thought I'll just impromptu just do this. If you like it, if you have some stories, if you have anything that you want to discuss with, I think there's a lot of depth in the experience every one of us goes through in this game, and I think that's the real beauty of and the real story of what poker is about. And if you are interested in talking about it, sharing your own experiences, hit me up. We can chat up. All right, guys. See you.